Kandid shop. We speaking on things you not. Just press play and let it rock. Hey, welcome to the Kandid shop. Whoa, welcome to the Kandid shop. We speaking on things you not. Just press play and let it rock. Hey, welcome to the Kandid shop. Oh, feel like we going through mad things. Gotta keep it real when they choose not. We gon' talk about it when the news drop. Welcome to the show where you know we don't fake this. Keep your opinion to yourself if it don't make sense.
Hey, Podcast Nation, it's your girl, Candidly Kristen, and this is the Kandid Shop, your #1 destination for candid conversations. Today, we are going to do a deep dive into imposter syndrome, or imposterism, which, by the way, is a very real thing experienced by as many as 82% of the population. I have been dying to have this candid chat, and I have 3 of the most amazing ladies here to lend their unique voices to the conversation. First up, I have business intuitive and author of Composure, The Art of Executive Presence, and The Moonshot Effect, Disrupting Business as Usual, Kate Purmal. My next guest is life coach, founder and creator of the 5-Step Power Pathway, and host of the Mask Off podcast, Kim Groth. And last but certainly not least is mindfulness teacher, purpose and mindset coach, and host of the Fully Mindful podcast, Melissa Chureau. Welcome, all you fabulous ladies to the Kandid Shop. Imposter syndrome or imposterism, I looked it up, can be loosely defined as a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evident success. So what that sounds like to me is self-doubt on steroids. Melissa, Kate, Kim, do you agree with that definition? Want to add to it? Is imposter syndrome just a high form of self-doubt or something more?
I would say, this is Melissa here, and I'd say that it's something more. It's a little bit more insidious than that, and it plagues people who are highly competent and who are very good at what they do. But the thing that makes it different is that there's this undeniable, unquestionable, very real feeling that people are going to figure out that they're a fraud, that somehow they aren't actually competent, that they actually don't know what they're doing, and they're going to be found out about it.
Yeah, and it's that hidden aspect that actually makes it even worse, because when those who have imposter syndrome look around, they presume that nobody else has it. And it's once they discover that they're not the only one, it's like this huge relief that even the most confident seeming senior executive men and women actually experience imposter syndrome periodically or frequently. And that's a huge aha for them.
Got it.
I would just add in too that I talk about the perfection mask all the time. I talk about the masks that we wear and taking them off to be our authentic selves. And I always quote, I think Brene Brown says it, that comparison is the death of creativity. And I think that when we struggle with the imposter syndrome, it's partly because, yes, the self-doubt, but also because we're comparing to one another. So I went on TikTok like 8 months ago. And whenever I get into that space of comparing myself to what other people are doing, I shut down. I lose my inspiration. I lose my ability to create. And I'm like, who am I? And that's like a saying that people that struggle with imposter syndrome will often say, who am I to do this? Who am I to put my content out there? I'm a nobody.
Right. So I was poking around doing research on imposter syndrome, and I found this article on the Science of the People website, and they listed 5 primary types of imposters. And they are the perfectionist, the natural genius, the expert, the rugged individualist, and the Superman or Superwoman. Do you guys think that encompasses the full range of the different kinds of ways imposter syndrome shows up?
This is Kate. I have a fingerprint that is a little bit different because it talks about the behaviors that are associated with imposter syndrome. And we identified 5 behaviors. The first is lack of confidence. The second is rejection sensitivity. The third is depressed entitlement, feeling like you're less deserving, or you're a member of an out group and you don't deserve what the in group, quote unquote, deserves. The fourth is perfectionism. And the fifth is feeling like a fraud. So we identify them by those behaviors, and those behaviors range differently in different people. So from we have over 5,000 people take our assessment, which is on our website, composurethebook.com. It's free. And we don't find any typical patterns that appear like phenotypes or personas. We see these things up and down depending upon who has it, and also situationally, they tend to change. That's our view of it.
Okay. And Melissa or Kim, you want to weigh in on those 5 types?
I somehow muted myself. I would agree with Kate, that there's really sort of a spectrum, I guess, and depending situationally where people are, they might experience it differently. I also really think it's important, and I hope Kate and Kim will agree that and we haven't talked about this yet, but it can really be exacerbated by, and I think is caused by, it's a systemic issue, right? And so that's the thing, is that there are certain types of jobs or careers where this really shows up because systemically, this is how it is. So for instance, I'm a lawyer, and it shows up a lot in lawyers because it's a very, for lack of a better way of putting it, not always very friendly to women and BIPOC individuals. And so, and there's a certain way that the culture of law is, right? Lawyers look for mistakes. It's very public work. It's very, you're in front of a judge or other lawyers who are trying to find where you have made a mistake. That's just the way it is. And then you have law firm culture, right? Which is very difficult on women and BIPOC. And it's you already feel separate and different from, because you are. And then you're having to prove you're somehow the individual that has to prove that you are the woman or the BIPOC or the whoever your particular, what makes you an individual. Suddenly you're an example. And so the pressure's on.
Right.
To be the right one, to be the hard worker, the perfectionist, all of that, to be the emblem of, you're supposed to be the shining example of whoever it is that you represent. So you already feel different. And then the system is set up to exploit that.
Got it. That was interesting. Thank you, Melissa.
I was just going to add that I'm not sure about the different types. I'm going to be honest and take my mask off and just say, I don't know about those different types. I can certainly speak to the perfectionism. And really what the problem is that because of the imposter syndrome, because of all these behaviors and types, that we are unwilling, unable to show up as our true selves, whether you are being a lawyer, whatever field or environment you're going into, you're very often, if you're struggling with this imposter syndrome, you're not bringing your true, authentic self forward. You're wearing masks. It's someone else. You're trying to please. You're trying to perform. You're trying to perfect and be someone who you're not. And that's what's causing so much strife in our world. That's why we are the most, addicted, overweight, in debt society going.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. Well, that's actually a great segue. Because I'd like to know, does imposter syndrome affect or show up more or more predominantly in one socioeconomic, ethnic, gender-based, age-based group than another?
I can tell you what our research has said. So again, we've had more than 5,000 people take our assessment. what we know is that, and when it comes to levels in companies, because we mostly work with corporate individuals, entry-level employees and first-level managers tend to score higher in the imposter behaviors than more senior people. So over time, people start to develop more confidence and feel more comfortable in their work environment, and their scores go down a bit.
Okay.
Women tend to score higher in lack of confidence, depressed entitlement, and rejection sensitivity. So those three things are where we see women scoring higher than men, whereas the other two, perfectionism and feeling like a fraud, men and women in our surveys score roughly equally. And then the third thing we know is imposter behaviors often remain dormant when things are going well, or when people are in comfortable, secure environments where they've been in the same job for 3 years, they've developed good relationships, they've built their credibility. But then the minute they move into a dynamic that is challenging or scary, frankly, then like interviewing for a new job, starting a new position, presenting to an executive team, I'm sure in your legal profession, there's many of those situations. That's when the things flare up. And that's what our research shows.
Okay. All right. And it's funny because I'm thinking that the more senior you become, the more it would show up. And your research shows it's the opposite. The entry-level people are feeling it more.
Yeah. As a baseline, entry-level people feel it more. But I coach a lot of executive women who are either moving into the C-suite or they're moving into board roles. And that whole shift is a completely different shift with a far greater, it's just more scrutiny. It's more gut feel. It's also highly competitive. There are fewer positions, and women have tended in the past not to be well represented there. So once they get to that level in those situations, it shoots way up again.
Okay.
I'm not really sure about the research, but what I would say from my own experience personally and with working with clients is that what I have found that underpins the imposter syndrome, we talked about the self-doubt, but what underpins that? What's underneath that? And there's this overall sense of unworthiness. And I think feeling unworthy is, I don't know if you can swear on this podcast. I should have asked. Okay, because I swear a lot. I love to swear.
It's a Kandid shop. Yes, okay. You can.
Like, it fucking kills me, like blows me away that as a society, it's universal. The suffering is freaking universal when you boil it down to how many of us freaking feel unworthy. And then that's just a coping strategy, like being a perfectionist, being a people pleaser, performing, all of those strategies are just a way for us to try to survive and cope, because at the end of the day, we don't feel safe or worthy enough to be who we truly are. And that just freaking like blows my mind. So to me, I feel like it would be universal amongst classes, races, whoever. I was a stay-at-home mom for 23 years. And in the world of just being a stay-at-home mom, imposter syndrome shows up. I'm not a good enough mom. I didn't do this with my kids. I didn't make the sandwiches all night, like smiley faces and with the crust off and, and these, that was so not me. I was just like, here you go buy some chicken nuggets at school today or get pizza or whatever.
Got it. So what do you ladies think the root cause of imposter syndrome is?
I found it to be trauma. And so imposter syndrome is behaviors that result from being in a triggered state where something triggers you. It could trigger your sense of unworthiness. It could trigger your sense of otherness. Whatever that is, these traumas that we carry with us based on our experiences throughout our life. And by the way, one of the things I deal a lot with is women in particular who have been, and people of color who have been traumatized in work environments. This is new trauma. So there's old trauma, generational trauma that we carry, and new trauma. And the thing about trauma is it sits in your system and it keeps you on high alert. So the imposter syndrome, imposter states are high alert states where you're overly worried about what the external world is thinking or feeling or judging you or valuing you, and underconnected or disconnected from your own internal sense of validation and value. And so that is triggered by trauma and fear and high alert.
I was just going to say, I would agree with Kate on the trauma piece. Very quickly, I'll just add that Gabor Mate says all the time about trauma, which is that we would rather be attached to someone else, therefore being an imposter or being someone who we're not, in order to stay attached for survival, it's a survival instinct, than to be our own true individual selves and risk the potential of being separate or isolated or other than. So it is definitely trauma, childhood wounding, and I would go as far as to say it is generational as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just wanted to chime in, and I really like what both Kim and Kate have had to say and about trauma. That makes sense. And I do think, just to get back to that point that I raised before about it being systemic, this is really systemic in a lot of the work cultures, right? And so one of the things that I think your listeners might be interested in is Rushika Tolashan and her co-author wrote a couple of articles about imposter syndrome, and they came back more recently, I think it was in the last year, writing an article about stop telling women that they have imposter syndrome. And basically, they're not saying that it doesn't exist and that people don't feel these feelings. They do, but they're getting at this idea of we need to look at the issues from a more systemic point of view, and to see that it's work trauma, as Kate was saying. So it's this continued trauma, which does affect more certain populations, underrepresented populations, whether they're BIPOC or LGBTQIA or, some other population. It tends to, at least their research showed that it was affecting them as well. And it's not so simply an issue of just being ourselves. Like, that's the biggest fear, right? We have to do additional work. And their whole point was, yes, we can do as individuals work on ourselves so that there absolutely are things that we can do, and people should know that. And I think all three of us work with people on how to get over this sense of imposterism and feel empowered. But we really do need to hold these cultures responsible too, and they need to make some changes. And so I highly recommend, Rushika Tolashan wrote a book called Inclusion on Purpose. It's fantastic if people are interested in looking at that kind of broader view of how these systems can change and how they need to change.
Thank you for that. That will be in the show notes because I'm interested in that book myself. So ladies, tell me, if somebody is listening to this, what are some key indicators that the person listening or someone they know and love could be suffering from imposter syndrome? Like, how does it show up in real life?
Well, it can show up in so many ways. I'll take a couple. I'm sure Kim and Kate have lots of others, but, it really can be people shooting their own careers in the foot, or their own lives in the foot, right? So, they may not want to take chances that they would otherwise take because they're afraid, well, if I do this and then, people will know that I'm not as good of a mom, I'm not as good of a lawyer, a doctor, C-suite person, or whatever the case may be. So I'm not going to take any chances. That's one way. So they can really end up harming themselves, and how they feel in their lives and their own confidence.
Got it.
Yeah, I would add in as well, playing small and not speaking up. And I'm going to give you a real-time example. Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay, so for the beginning part of this recording, I'm listening to you guys speak, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, lawyer, corporate woman, I'm a stay-at-home mom. Like I started to have that dialogue going on. I'm not kidding you. I'm being 100% real and taking my mask off. And I'm thinking to myself, what the fuck do I have to ask with these women? No, I'm not even kidding you. And so I could very easily just like sit back, and I've kept my mouth shut, but I'm breathing and I'm paying attention to my breath. I'm feeling my body, and I'm reminding myself, because I have done a shit ton of work on myself. So I know, right? And I'm aware of it. I'm aware of this pattern because I suffer from the people pleaser and the perfectionist. And I'm like, oh, I see it. There's that imposter. And I want to stay in the back and just let the two of you speak and me be quiet. And I'm like, nope, can't do it. Can't do it. But that's a telltale sign right there. Like not wanting to speak up and use your voice and feeling like I'm unworthy. I have nothing to add or say because they're too smart. They're intelligent women and I'm not.
And you know what's funny, Kim, is that you guys are on camera. I'm not, so I can see you. And I kind of felt that when they were talking. I'm like, huh, that was interesting. Now I know what it was.
Yeah.
We're having this conversation, but I kind of felt it.
The crazy thing, Kim, is I was sitting there feeling the same way. I'm like, oh, these two women know so much. I better pull out my statistics. I'm like an expert, so there's my perfectionism. Like, I better sound like I know what the fuck I'm talking about.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, that's how that's.
Yeah, for bringing us there, Kim, because that is just exactly what's needed, really. This ability to come clean about how you're feeling so that everybody else can relate to it. And what you said about breathing and finding your butt in the seat, thank you, because that is key, is getting back in your body. Because when you're in imposter syndrome, you go into fight or flight and you leave your body and you go into a traumatic response. And so getting back in the body and slowing down, we often talk about counting backwards from 3 to 2 to 1, and then asking a question or making some sort of statement that is, can you clarify that, or something when you're in a tense situation, so that you can come back into your body and find your
that's beautiful. Because literally in the beginning, when I was in that space, I was holding my breath. I wasn't breathing because I was feeling the flooding of the overwhelm. And then it was like, then I was aware, right? I had the awareness. This is what I'm doing. And then I just started to breathe. And then Kate, even as you said, 3, 2, 1, like that just brought me right down.
Good. Oh, this is amazing. So the breathing is a great segue into solutions, because I love to inform and educate and stuff like that. But I most love to give my listeners real practical tools and tips that they can use like right now to start to reframe their self-talk and how they can start to come out of imposter syndrome and take the masks off.
One of the most important practices that we use that underlie all of the work, all of the interventions that we have for people who are suffering from this, is this idea of dissociating out of yourself and observing the situation from a neutral perspective, third-party perspective. So one example, we have something we call a brain hack, where we have people imagine a situation that's coming up, really common situation. They're about to give a big presentation, and they're afraid somebody's going to ask them a question they don't know an answer to. They're not so much that they're going to mess up the presentation, but they will be confronted with not knowing an answer, or not having the right information, or not having thought about something that's a big deal. And we ask them to imagine a clone that is exactly like them in every way, has every life experience, but one difference: that clone never even thinks about worrying about whether they'll have the right answer. And then we have them ask how that clone gets up in the morning. What did they do the night before? What happens when they walk in the room? So it's this way to observe what you, not experiencing this, would be like. And it's just a really helpful way to examine how those behaviors impact your day-to-day and hour-to-hour activities and thoughts and all of that. Usually the clone does yoga in the morning and doesn't do the presentation 16 times the night before. And when somebody says something they don't know the answer to, they say, wow, that's such a great question. You know what? My team and I didn't consider that. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Tell me what you see that we may have missed. And that it's just a completely different way of showing up. And that is really helpful for people to see that there is another way to do this. They don't have to be trapped in the way that they're contained and shut down and in the way they show up.
Right. That's awesome.
I love that, Kate. Gosh, I was like, wow, that's such a great tool. I'm totally stealing that.
Right.
Me too.
And one that I thought is kind of a fun one for me is when we notice our patterns. So we notice the little thought that says, you must practice this 16 times tonight and you're still going to suck or whatever. Right. I call that, like, some people call it naming the gremlins. I'm just naming a voice. For me, I envision a cartoon character that's kind of funny. You know, there was this old, like, I forget, it was from like the 70s and 80s, but there was this little commercial like for kids called Yuck Mouth. And he was like this funny little guy and he had a cute little song and he never brushed his teeth. They called me Yuck Mouth. And so, like, to me, that's my gremlin. That's my Yuck Mouth. And then I have compassion for this thing. And I go, thank you so much, Yuck Mouth, because you're trying to keep me safe. You're trying to keep me safe and protected. And I really appreciate that. You can go hang out in the corner over there, Yuck Mouth. And I'll listen to you, you know, when it's time, but I got this. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do this thing. Well, and you can see I'm on video right now. I'm holding my heart and I'm breathing into it, like Kim was saying and Kate was saying, and I'm breathing into that self-compassion for myself of like, I got this.
I love it.
I'll just piggyback on what the two of you were saying, which is very similar. You're talking about, what I'm hearing is visualization. I'm hearing changing inner belief systems, limiting belief systems. And what I do with clients is I create, as you said in the beginning, Kristen, I created a 5-step power pathway, and I do it like through individual coaching. So it's over time. It's inner work, and it's deep inner work. But the first thing is really being able to be aware of the pattern. Dr. Phil would say all the time, you cannot change that which you're unaware of. If you're not aware of your patterns, nothing's going to change. You're going to keep showing up as the imposter. The second thing is that you really have to own your shit, right?
Yeah.
You have to own it. You have to be able to say, okay, yes, here's my pattern. I'm showing up as an imposter syndrome or an imposter. And rather than blaming other people or saying, well, it's because of this, that, or the other thing, you have to own it and know that it's your job and your 100% responsibility to change the pattern. Right. And then I go from the head, because that's all in the mind, take the elevator down into the heart. And that's where I do something similar to what Melissa was saying, like with it's really about reparenting the inner child, because for me, I believe it's our inner child that's so afraid. That's where the self-doubt is. So it's about reparenting, going in and having compassion for that part of ourselves. And even shadow work is such a huge part as well, because we're cutting parts of ourselves off. Like, oh, I don't like the part of me that is less than perfect or doesn't show up like I just did earlier, right? Like I could easily cut that part of myself off and say, oh, you suck, or the yuck mouth, like you were just saying, and having all that negative inner dialogue. But no, it's about integrating. It's about integrating all parts of ourselves so that we can show up from a place of wholeness. And then I think when we come, not that I think, I know, because I've done the work over and over, when we come from a place of wholeness, then we don't have to wear the imposter mask. We don't have to wear the perfection mask. We don't have to show up as anyone other than ourselves.
I love all of that. I love all of it. So what if each of you ladies at this juncture could give my listeners your last thoughts on imposter syndrome, and then how they can connect with you. Like, I want them to hear directly from you what your best one or two pieces of advice would be if they suspect they are or know they are dealing with imposter syndrome.
This is Kate. I'll go ahead and start. So I have a chapter in my book called Badass Boundaries, because personal boundaries are actually what can really protect you from getting triggered, which then is what triggers you into imposter syndrome. So it's really important to recognize that you control boundaries around you, and that you can learn to control what comes in and only allow things to come in when you're willing to allow it. And that is a really powerful way to keep your boundaries open, to still be able to communicate and hear things, but recognize that sometimes you're not going to let it in. And a quick example, many of my clients hate performance reviews. Even though they are performers, they can't stand performance reviews. So they go into performance reviews and they shut down. They don't hear anything. It's like they go into a traumatic flight response, and then they leave and they think, oh, I have to read my performance review. I'm like, no, you don't. That review can sit all the way outside your personal boundary, and you never have to read it. You can just leave it right there, because it is, or is, you get to decide whether you take in somebody's critique of you or somebody's, compassionate advice. It's all up to you. And once you realize that, then you don't get hijacked by things that are coming in. So really, if there's one thing you can do to help to protect yourself and to really fill yourself with your own intrinsic sense of value and validation, it is to develop personal boundaries so you can fill up that cup. My website is composurethebook.com, and there is a free audiobook. The audiobook is also available on Audible, but we made the chapters free on my website. I have a free 100-page workbook that takes you through writing exercises, guided meditations, etc. And there's lots of brain hacks on my podcast as well that take people through actually getting brain hacked.
Nice. Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you.
I would just say I'm a firm believer in, and I've been saying it throughout, I'm a firm believer about doing the inner work and just really healing from the wounding and being able to show up from a place of wholeness where you can fill your cup. I will say that doing the inner work is not for the lighthearted, and it's very difficult to go it alone. So whether you find, a support group, a therapist, or a coach, just to encourage, I would encourage your listeners to find someone to help them along the way, along the path. It's been huge for me in my life to do this inner work and to go from my prison to my paradise, my people pleasing and perfectionist prison to paradise.
Yeah.
And I have if people want to know, am I truly a people pleaser? Am I a perfectionist? I have a people pleaser and perfectionist quiz on my website at kimgrosscoaching.com. I also, as you mentioned earlier, I have my podcast, Masks Off. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, all over the place.
All right. Thank you so much, Kim and Melissa.
Yeah, thank you. This has been so great. I've learned so much from Kim and Kate, and I'm just honored to have been asked here on your podcast, Kristen, and to be amongst these two incredible women who have so much to offer. So thank you. And I guess what I have to say, for what it's worth, I do a lot of mindfulness and somatics work with people, because sometimes our bodies are a lot smarter and wiser and than our minds. We spend most of our time from the neck up, and sometimes nothing wrong with our brains. We have great tools to use, but sometimes they get a little crazy up there. And so I do a lot of work from the neck down, and it can be really powerful and really transformative about figuring out how to embody calmness and trust and self-empowerment And it can be, I want people to know that's there for them. Their bodies are wise. Their body knows the answer, and it's very accessible. You don't have to do anything special. You don't have to get a special meditation cushion. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to do any of that. These are really practical exercises. You can find some of them on my website, thefullymindful.com. I have a free downloadable book, mindfulness meditation for beginners, that can really help with imposterism and the experience of how we experience imposterism, starting to see our patterns and starting to move beyond them. I also have some free guided meditations on my podcast. They're not all of the podcast is about meditation, but I do offer them about once every other week. The podcast is called The Fully Mindful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. And listen, I have learned so much in this time that you ladies have been on the show. I thank Kate, Kim, Melissa, just for showing up and being your authentic selves with me and my listeners. So I appreciate you all. This conversation wasn't that lengthy, but I think it was powerful. And I hope that when it goes out to the world, the people that hear it will be as impacted as I was by some of the things you guys said. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all the topics and conversations that you lead here on your podcast. They're really impactful.
Thank you so much. That is the goal. That's the goal. So all of your contact information with clickable links to your social media, whatever you put in your bio on the intake form, will be included in the show notes so that people can, connect with you. Whoever they resonated with them most, they can connect with them. Guys, I want everybody listening to don't forget to visit my website at www.thecandidshop.com. Check out some episodes, subscribe to the newsletter, share the show, and make sure you come back. Until next time, I want everybody listening to keep it safe, keep it healthy, and keep it candid.